Well, you guys have seen this truck a couple of times in some videos a while ago. The most recent one yanking the John Deere lawn tractor out of a ditch. And today it's time to do some work on it. It's the 1989 Ford F-150 4x4. It's got the two tanks, the back tank and front tank. And it's got the 5-speed manual transmission, as well as the 4x4 high and low. So in reality, when you combine the low gears with the regular gears, you've got 10 speeds. But what I got to do today actually is replace the fuel tank sending unit. This thing's got two tanks, and you have a toggle switch here. You can toggle between rear tank and front tank. And I've already replaced the rear tank a while ago, before I started making videos, because that tank had a leak in it. So while I had it out, I went ahead and replaced the sending unit as well. But the front tank works just fine, doesn't have a leak. But the sending unit is basically intermittent. Sometimes I'll get a reading on the gauge, and at other times I won't. So in order to do that, that's going to actually be somewhat involved. First thing I got to do is drop the tank out of the vehicle, and that's going to be a little harder than usual. This truck's got a lot of rust on the frame, as you can see, and being a 4x4, that's actually the transfer case right there. Being a 4x4, I gotta take off this kick plate with these old rusted bolts holding it in, and then I gotta remove these straps, one back here and then one under that skid plate bracket, and as well as disconnect the fuel filler neck, and then I can just go ahead and lower the tank down to the ground. I'll probably use a hydraulic floor jack for that, just for control. And then, you know, lower it far enough so that I can get to the wiring and the fuel line connectors, and pull it out from under the vehicle and replace the sending unit finally. And I went ahead and got the tank empty by basically, there's a video about that called Laziness Mother of Invention. I went ahead and basically transferred all the fuel out of this tank into a portable container, and then put that in the rear tank, which is basically mounted right above the spare tire back there that I replaced about a couple of years ago. So let me go ahead and get started on this project. I got a piece of cardboard under there I'm laying on because it's just been raining constantly. You can see the driveway is still wet. I'm not sure how much good weather we're going to have. Last time this truck was driven was actually when I used it to pull the John Deere out of the ditch. So I've got it on the battery charger right now. It cranked over, but it cranked over slowly. Still got the same battery that came with it when I got it. Battery's at least 12 years old. But it's not drawing any amps, so actually just a little bit. You can see it fluttering, so that battery is nearing full charge. So we'll have plenty of juice later on to give this thing a test. But let me go ahead and get started taking off that kick plate, and kind of go from there. Well, I got the skid plate off finally. That's a pretty heavy piece of equipment there. You can tell how thick that metal is, and just how long it is. It runs along the full length of the tank, as well as up the side of the tank. So that's a good 35-40 pounds right there. That's kind of hard to deal with when you're lying on your back and you got a bunch of rust and debris falling in your face. But finally got that removed, and now the fuel tank is exposed, and I've already started removing. It's held in there by two straps, one here and then one here. And what I got to do now is remove this bolt and this bolt, which I've already started working on, and that'll allow me to lower the tank just enough to start disconnecting the fuel lines and the electrical wiring. And then of course, before I do that, I have to disconnect the filler neck as well too. So pretty well made. I mean, it's a 4x4, so it's got all the skid plates and stuff like that, but boy, with all the rust and everything, that sure does make it much more challenging to get these bolts out of here that I've left in there. You can see the amount of rust and everything, so it took lots of penetrating oil and wire brushing to knock off all that loose rust, so these bolts would come out as easy as they can, even though they didn't come out very easily. But anyway, let me get to work on that bolt here, and hopefully the next video clip will be of this tank removed, so we can go ahead and start working on the sending unit. Okay, the gas tank is finally out. That was a hard job. This is about maybe 3 hours into the job. This is the filler neck assembly, and it's basically just a double hose. This is where the gas actually pours in, but it's got this outer hose here to act as a safety in case this hose has a leak. And that guy had to come off first in order to get the tank out. And then there were two straps, one there and one there, that had to come out. And the hard part is getting the tank low enough onto the ground without stressing the input and output for the fuel and also the electrical connectors, so you can go ahead and work those things loose. But in combination with a floor jack and some creative maneuvering, I was able to get all that stuff undone. The tank is itself is not very heavy. You can tell it's fairly empty. The procedure I used in the video, Laziness Mother of Invention, really worked out well. There might be a few ounces of fuel in here, and that's about it. So I've got everything covered up to prevent dirt entry and also minimize the fumes. And I got the fuel lines here covered up, as well as the vent going way over there out of the way. And what has to happen now is this ring, this entire ring, needs to be turned counterclockwise to unloosen it, and then the fuel pump and sending unit assembly can lift out of there. And there's a lot of rust on this truck. I mean, you can just see all the rust that just accumulated over the years. So a good idea to get that loose is to use a wire brush and kind of go all around the circumference of this locking ring. Get as much of the rust out of there as you can, and then go ahead and douse it in penetrating oil, which I've used there. That's why it looks all wet. And I don't have the proper tool. I believe the proper tool is called a spanner wrench. And what I'm going to end up having to do, like most people basically, is just take a screwdriver like that and pound on these tabs to knock it loose. And that would probably be another good amount of work. So mechanics who do this really do earn their money, because this is a pretty hard job considering all the rust involved and all the chunks of rust falling in your face and having to do everything on your back. And you can just get an idea of how ungangly these things are. They're not really very easy to handle. But anyway, no turning back now. Time to press on and get it done, and then go in with the new sending unit. Oh yeah, so also to minimize, for better safety, I've got everything capped off like I said earlier to minimize the fumes, and also a fire extinguisher handy just in case. There might be a little bit of gas left in here on the bottom what the pump couldn't pick up, but it's always good to err on the safe side. And plus this lubricant that I have on here, the penetrating oil, should act to minimize any sparks, but should there be any sparks, I should be okay. I've done this before on the back tank and had good success, so there's no reason to believe I wouldn't have good success on the front tank. So now on to getting out that sending unit. Man, that was just about the easiest time I've had getting this sending unit out of there, and I've done many of these kinds of repairs before: fuel pump replacements, fuel tank replacements, fuel sending unit replacements. Here's the spanner nut. I think this thing came off in about maybe 7 or 8 strikes with a hammer around the circumference, and came right on loose. So here's the fuel pump and sending unit assembly. You can see the inline fuel pump right here, and here's the pickup strainer right there. And then this element here is actually your sending unit, along with a brass float. And right now it's bottomed out, and as you add fuel, it causes the float to rise. And inside here is a variable resistor, so as the float rises, the resistance decreases, and as that resistance decreases, the fuel gauge gets more voltage and starts to go toward the full position. And this is a very typical problem. The resistor in here kind of gets noisy, might have a few breaks in it, so you might get to that position there and have no reading, or that position there or have no reading. Or you might even have an open circuit in here like what I have, so no matter what position this float is in, the fuel gauge is completely inoperative. So what I have next is the new sending unit. Got the Dorman 692018 for 19-gallon tanks, 19-gallon midship tanks, because this truck's got the 8-foot bed, dual tank setup. And here's what the new part looks like. And we're just going to be doing the sending unit. There's no issues whatsoever with the fuel pump. And this is a little bit different design. It's got a nitrofill float instead of the brass float here. These floats can be problematic if they get any corrosion in there. They could get a leak and fill up and give you an inaccurate reading. Although this float seems to be pretty dry, so that's not the issue. The issue is going to be electrical inside the resistor. And here you can actually see the resistance elements on the new part. Each one of these lines, each one of these turns of wire represents a different resistance value. So you have 2 sets of contacts on your wiper arm and a ceramic substrate back here. And then as this thing goes up like that, as you put more gas in it, the resistance decreases. It just goes up and down like that. It's a very simple circuit. And also the Dorman model came with a new block ring kit, fuel pump gasket, as well as fuel pump hose and a new strainer. So I'll go ahead and replace these parts as well. And with a new lock ring like this thing should go on here very easily. So I got to transfer a few parts. Got to get this old fuel pump off of here, which is not too big of a deal. And turns out there was not very much gas left in this tank at all. That procedure I did where I ran the fuel pump and transferred the fuel to the rear tank ended up working out very well. You can sort of get an idea if I shake the tank. That's how much gas is left in there. Basically the fuel pump's unable to pump that last remaining bit of gas out. But still better to be on the safe side and have everything ready just in case, because you don't know how much gas is really in there. And it's imperative to drain this tank as best you can, because 19-gallon tank is going to be really heavy to try to maneuver under the truck, and also unsafe. So let me get to transferring everything over to the new part, and then we'll be able to put everything back together and see how it works. Okay, now I've got the fuel pump and sending unit assembly all built up, and I've got all these wires out here because I want to test this thing completely before going in. So I've got a battery here, and the first thing I want to do is test the fuel pump itself, make sure that it's not bad, because putting in all that stuff is a really hard job, especially on an older truck with C's, bolts, and lots of rust and all that kind of stuff. So we want to make sure that we're going in with good components. And you want to test everything where it breaks out here. You could put voltage directly on the pump itself, but I want to test all the wiring, all the connections and everything. So that's why I have everything broken out right here. And so now we'll go ahead and test the pump. Looks like it's running pretty good. Just want to tap on it, make sure there's no intermittency there. Same thing it's going to do bouncing down the road, so you want to make sure all these wires are good and tight. Nice consistent operation. So the fuel pump test okay. You can't really run these things too long dry like that because the gasoline, this is submerged in gas during operation, and the gasoline actually acts to cool the pump down. But running it for a few seconds like that's not going to hurt anything, just for testing. And now I want to test this fuel sending unit to make sure that we have good operation there. And its output's broken out here to the multimeter, which I have right here. I don't know if you can see, the sun's kind of making a glare. But actually I was wrong. In the empty position, the resistance decreases, and as I go up, the resistance should increase. And I'm going to move this arm very slowly, and you see the resistance increasing in a nice linear fashion all the way up to 160 ohms. And then now we'll go back down. So that looks nice and linear, not very noisy. Down to 15 ohms again. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to test the older sending unit. See what it's doing. Let me get this out of the way. And we'll go ahead and wire this up. Kind of hard to do with one hand. Okay. Now we're in the empty position. And it's very noisy. Wish the sun were cooperating with me today. But in the empty position you should have 15 ohms. The meter is having a hard time registering actually. It's just all over the map. We're down to the K ohm range now, which is basically open circuit as far as the fuel gauge in the car is concerned, as primitive it is as it is. So now we'll go ahead and move this thing slowly, just as before. See, we're all over the map. It's not acting very linear. Jump to 150 right there, now 350. 64 ohms. Jump to 160 there for a second. 200 ohms. And now to our full position here, 192 ohms. So best case scenario, it's out of spec. And worst case scenario, it's pretty noisy. It's got a few spots in here causing the meter to jump. And now we're back down to empty again, which puts us into the K ohm range, which is open circuit. It's like 800 ohms. So we know this was the cause of the problem for that fuel gauge not working right, and we also know that this sending unit here is working properly and will fix our problem. So now we have confidence we can go ahead back in with this assembly that I got built up and start putting everything back in the car. And a few words about building these back up. You want to be careful when you assemble them. Get this a little bit better position to see. The position of the fuel strainer, that white thing down there, relative to the connectors, is important because of the shape of the fuel tank. So you want to make sure you get that clocked in the right position, basically about the, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock position relative to the piping there, the tubing. And you can kind of get that from looking at this, comparing the notch on the old strainer and how it's positioned on the gasket to that of the new one, and it just presses on. The other thing you want to be careful of if you're building up one of these yourself instead of buying the completely assembled unit, and even sometimes on a completely assembled unit, as you're putting these together, you want to route the power wires and fuel sending unit wires away from interfering with the actual mechanism here, so that operates freely and doesn't rub against anything, or you get an inaccurate reading. So you kind of want to twist these wires around the tubing like that, just to kind of get them out of the way. And then finally, you're not going to be able to tell, but the pump is conspicuously marked with negative and positive for your power leads, so you want to make sure you get those correct as well too. You don't want the pump running backwards. And this kit came with a new hose, as well as some clamps, but I decided to use the old hose. The old hose is actually it's still in pretty good shape. I don't have the tools to properly crimp this anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse the old hose. It's still nice and supple, and it's actually, as you can see, a lot more thick than this hose here. So I think we'll be okay with this arrangement that we have here. And now this thing, since it's all built up and tested, it's ready to go back into the tank, and then the tank back on the truck. Just as one final check to see how this actually operates in the vehicle, once the tank is put back in, I've got it wired to the vehicle wiring harness. That's one of the things that Ford and a lot of other manufacturers do, is they give you generous links for cables and fuel lines, so you can actually drop the tank quite a ways to gain access to these parts. And I've got the potentiometer all the way down to 0, which should be empty tank. And we'll go ahead and see how this fuel gauge works. So I'll go ahead and turn the ignition on. And right now it's measuring the quantity of fuel in the rear tank. So now what I want to do is toggle the switch over to the front tank. And of course everything's going down to empty, which as it should be. And now we'll come out here and we'll go to about halfway. And the gauge is slowly creeping up, as it should, to about the midpoint. And we'll keep on going. We'll go to the full position. Gauge is reading full, as it should. Let me get a better angle on it. I've seen some brand new sending units actually, when it reads full, read a little bit less than full, just because of the lack of quality control. The value of the resistance in there is not quite to OEM specification, but it looks like this one's right on the mark, a little bit higher than full. And now we'll go back down with it again. Try to go halfway, approximately. Real close. It's hard to guess what halfway really means, the way that potentiometer is designed, the way the float arm is shaped. That's pretty close. And now we'll bring it all the way down to empty. And that's operating as it should be. And since while we're on the front tank there, on a Ford at least, when you turn the ignition key on, it'll run the fuel pump for about a second, then unless you're cranking the engine, it'll just go ahead and shut off. I want to see if that happens here on the fuel pump out here. So I'm going to shut this ignition off. And then I'll go ahead and turn it back on again and see if I can hear that pump for about a second. Yep. Do it one more time. Perfect. Now we'll switch back to our rear tank. Gauge comes on up. Shut it down. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that. Put it in the tank. Clean all that stuff up and put some grease on there in case I have to get in here again in the future. And go ahead and try to mount everything back up. Okay, now the fuel tank sending unit and the fuel pump assembly is all installed in the fuel tank. I just used the hammer and screwdriver method. I don't have a spanner wrench. And just basically hammer that into position, kind of tapping all around the circumference evenly because this thing will tend to walk a little bit. You want to get a nice even seal. And I don't know if you can tell, but there are these little dents right here and also a raised area on the locking ring. You just want to rotate it into position just enough to where those two line up and match. That way it sort of it'll sort of click into place and provide the right amount of pressure against the O-ring under here to provide a good seal. And I went ahead and it's got a kind of a weird color because I went ahead and sprayed it with the metal protector, and just to prevent any kind of rust like we have on the fuel tank already, just to make this a little bit easier to get back off if I had to. Hopefully I won't, but it basically is all covered. And I went ahead and added a little bit of silicone dielectric grease to the contacts, so when I go back in the truck with it, it'll form a good electrical seal. So now this assembly is all built up and ready to go back in the truck. Just want to give you guys a quick shot of the tank in position, ready to go in. You can see that it's designed to be lowered to the ground, and this truck actually has a 6-inch lift on it with the mud grabber tires, and it still has enough slack to in the cabling to allow the tank to drop all the way down. But here's what all the connectors look like. So I've got the electrical connector securely fastened there, and then the supply and return lines all connected. These are just the duckbill clip kind. They just slip right on, the clip goes in. All I gotta do now is hook up the return line, which doesn't have enough slack yet. So that's kind of what it looks like. Now I'm gonna get under here and raise it up and connect the straps and carry on with the assembly. Well, finally got everything put back together. Took a lot longer than I expected. It's just that a lot of hard work, but got the filler neck all installed and fuel tank and also the kick plate. And the kick plate was actually pretty hard to do. It's hard to hold up 40 some odd pounds while you're on your back with rust falling in your face and trying to get all the bolts in, but finally got it done. It was a lot of work. So now I'm going to go for a drive to a gas station and see if that fuel gauge works like it should. Okay, now that I'm back and the truck is parked in its usual spot, got a full tank of gas out front, about 19 gallons. And right now we're running on the rear tank. Got about half a tank as before. And now the true test of all this work to see if everything works like it should. I'm going to go ahead and switch it to the front tank and see what happens. Alright, looks like everything's working like it should. Got a full tank and the fuel pump's running obviously because the engine hasn't died. Engine hasn't actually missed a beat. So I call that a complete job. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the rear tank. and it should go back to what it was before. So it's nice to have the dual tank system running like it should. The rear tank, before I started making YouTube videos, the rear tank actually had a good sending unit, but it had a leak, so I couldn't put any gas in it. And then the front tank had a bad sending unit, so I never knew how much gas I had. So kind of had problems on both ends. And now that it's working properly, I think what I'm going to keep on doing is switch between the two. That way I use both of them at least half the time. So I'll go ahead and run the rear dry. As soon as that gets rolled low, I'll just switch over to the front. And as soon as that gets toward E, I'll fill both up and then start the cycle all over again. So, not the easiest job in the world. It's a lot of the parts were heavy, and the truck had a lot of rust and corrosion on the frame and everything, and that kind of got in my face, and it's kind of hard to do everything on your back, but definitely well worth it to know how much gas you have now and to have a working fuel system. And as long as the fuel pumps don't fail next, I'll be in good shape if I get 5 years out of it. That'll be a good thing. So wasn't too bad for about $65 and maybe 6 hours worth of labor. So if you guys have any F-150s or any kind of Ford, really, that's pretty much how you would change a fuel pump, or a fuel pump or sending unit or both.